I recently explained the concept behind both A Patron Saint of Lost Causes and A Dirge For Dregs to someone, and their immediate response was, "Will your next album be quite so depressing?" So that intro was admittedly a bit of a red herring because I am not here today to explain to you the narrative behind A Dirge For Dregs. I would rather listeners sort of dive into that themselves, find their own interpretation, and maybe one day I will make a video about that. But this video here is all about the process of creating that concept album with a narrative structure, with motifs, with all that good stuff. And especially considering A Dirge For Dregs started its life as an EP. Now this EP was built to bridge the gap between bigger releases. It was supposed to be 3 to 5 songs, all of which would be really aggressive, really technical and dissonant, and I was really excited to do something that just came naturally. I started working on this as soon as Patron Saint of Lost Causes was finished, but then something happened. I wrote a song that currently on the album is called Death of the Author, and when I wrote the beginning riff of that song, the riff that follows as well, I immediately knew I was onto something different. And it really materialized more when those riffs morphed into a new song currently called This Is Not a Distress Call. If I allow myself to be the pretentious artist for a bit, which admittedly isn't a huge stretch for me, I find myself latching on to what I refer to as moments when I write things. And let me explain. I write a lot of music. I am surrounded by instruments whenever I work from home, and I will grab instruments and play whatever at any chance I get. But not all of it sort of tickles my fancy, if I allow myself a little Britishism there. But when it does, it typically is because I feel like I'm getting a glance into a moment of a story that compels me to want to explore that story more. And I could see this moment so clearly in my head that I thought, this needs to be explored. And initially I was going to try and explore this story across only 4 or 5 songs, but as I kept writing, I felt like there was more to this character, more to this world to explore. I found myself compelled to make it bigger and more, and I wanted to find out where it started and where it ended. And really what I did were a couple of things. One of them was I would write a riff and I would record it. And then I wouldn't think about it for a week. And then I would try to remember it and I would record myself remembering it. Or I would try to write up lyrics from memory. So I got these sort of misremembered versions of riffs, of songs, of lyrics, which really solidified the idea that these different songs all coexisted or belonged in the same collection. Because to me that tends to be what really draws me into the albums that I really love. They don't feel like just a collection of songs, they feel like a unified whole. And to me, a concept album especially needs to have that. And that riff at the start of Death of the Author became the blueprint to not all the riffs on the album. I didn't want it to feel super samey or anything, but it's sort of sprinkled in a healthy dose across the album, these little references to it. And there were even versions of it that I ended up cutting and didn't end up using on the album, which might pop up in a different project later down the line, we'll see. But overall, I found this idea or this practice of trying to remember things afterwards tied really nicely into at least my interpretation of the narrative, where these half-remembered dreams and memories played a really important part. And without diving into the narrative too much, I really wanted there to be that sort of thematic connective tissue that people would feel, even if they didn't spot, oh, that's this chord into this chord, just like in that song, or even if they don't pick up on it fully, that they would feel it. And I truly believe that has been a successful venture. And if you're someone who's looking to write a concept album, I would say, of course, don't force it, but try to connect to those glimpses, those moments, as I said, of the story, and try to kind of explore them further. Like the first concept album I ever wrote, which was never finished, by the way, but when I wrote the story, the music followed. Even though the music was the main thing about that album, the concept itself became a writing tool because it inspired me to go on. And I had a conversation with Pete from Down I Go, who's featured on a couple of tracks on the album recently, where we actually discussed how those concepts are really first and foremost the tool of the writer to get an idea across, and only secondarily from our perspectives a tool for the audience to connect with the album. And that might be a little bit solipsistic, it might be a little bit of a delusion of grandeur, and I do want people to enjoy listening to it, but to me, that concept really, first and foremost, is the inspiration to keep going, to keep writing. Now, I hope some of this actually resonated and it wasn't just me waxing poetic about my own process and my pretentious proclivities. But if you do have other questions about this, I'd love to see them in the comments. I'll dive in as much as I can and explain as much as not as much as I can, as much as I want to, because like I said, I do want people to engage with the story on their own terms as well. So if you've caught something that really resonates with you, share it, because I'd love to hear how people are taking these lyrics and these songs and how they're making them their own.